was a lot of crying, and Warren said, "Smile, ladies, let them see you smile." And he had his mother come and witness it all. So the grandmother of all these children sat there and watched them be taken from their mothers. But it got closer to 8 o'clock, and it was time to go, and he was getting a little just anxious. We got to get out, we got to go, it's 8 o'clock. And so it had just stopped all of a sudden. We were kind of waiting for, everything to be packed and stuff, so we drove out that night at 8 o'clock. We had no idea where we were going. We just knew that we were going to Zion. It was dark. There was 2 or 3 cars in our group, and we went so far, and then one of the drivers, a couple of the guys were driving, but they didn't know what was going on. They hadn't been trained, as I'll say it. They didn't know about the Redemption of Zion mission and stuff. So one of them got ahead of the other one and missed the turn. So the one that knew about it, had to get back in front of him and say, "Turn around." Well, he just turned around because he was in the excursion with all the boys and I. And so the van followed, and the van got stuck. And then we were really scared, because to us, we weren't supposed to be seen by anybody, and to Warren too, this was very secretive. So there was a little hiccup there in the plans. We had to try to go bounce the van to get it out, but it wasn't working. And then somebody stopped and asked for if we needed some help and needed a rope, and so they asked him to go get it. And while they were gone, another one of his helpers drove up and said, "He is wondering where you are." And so the driver of the excursion said, "Everybody get in." And we loaded 16 children and 5 ladies in that excursion. And we were packed from top to bottom. It wasn't much further. We were getting to a motorhome is where we were going. So it wasn't much further, but we got to the motorhome. He had the car pull right up to the side of it, and the doors open so that it was completely secretive. Like if anybody passing by, they couldn't tell what was going on. I was sitting right there by the door, and I kid you not, I was literally throwing each kid to him personally, to get him into the motorhome. And it was because he was so afraid of somebody seeing us or whatever, So,
looking back now, was there actually any fear of the children being taken away by the state of Utah at that point? Like, have you, because I haven't heard of anything like there being, I knew that they were after Warren, and even I grew up in St. George, right? So outside of Shore Creek, I knew about Warren. I never heard anything about there being any danger to his wives or his children.
Right. I look back and I wonder that myself, but he always put that into us.
Yeah.
That there was people that wanted to destroy his wives, cause them to lose their virginity, all this stuff. And so in our mind, it was this big, scary thing that the world and the government and everybody was coming after us.
Oh, yeah.
If you maybe try to think of it from a father's perspective, did he make all this up so that he could have his family with him? I don't know. It's just...
Or maybe he was actually truly paranoid of that happening.
Yeah, maybe he was.
And even if it's all in his head, that's still his reality, and he's going to act on whatever's going on in his head, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a very important point to make. So we get in the motorhome, and I want to say some of them, thought this was fun. We're going with Father, But I will personally say the 3 youngest girls, I think that one particular boy that I mentioned, he was right in the group of these. There was 3 girls and him that were about the same age. But the 3 girls were back on the bed, and he had me go back. He says, "I want you to go back and lay with them." And I went back there, and the look in their eyes of just And I want to say these girls were probably 2.5, 3 at most. The look on their faces were just lost, and they could tell. I could tell that they knew something was different. So that was really touching, and that has stuck with me through all the years. And I laid down by them and tried to just, do anything I could to comfort them and help them fall asleep. I don't remember much of the ride more than that, except for just, it seemed to be a long time with having all those many people in a motorhome.
Yeah.
And, but we arrived there early in the morning. I don't know, I want to say maybe it was more like 5 or 6 in the morning, or anyway. So we get to this place. It's in the forest, in the trees, in the woods. And we unload, and we went into this barn that had a loft in it. He said, just don't really remember all the details other than that we just automatically tried to make the best of what it was. I had so many children that I was watching over, and we tried to make our beds in a certain spot and sleeping bags for a minute there. We just had to kind of make do with what we had. And right off the bat, it was important to me to keep the children's schedule the same. So I had been teaching 2nd grade still that year. So I took the 2nd graders and 1 3rd grader and kept teaching them school. But I wouldn't let that little 2-year-old boy out of my sight. I just, even though I was teaching school, I'd give him some toys. We got to take some toys with us at first. We all had that question. We all called Warren and said, what about toys? And he said, take some of their favorite things. Take what you need to. So we had them at first. Did this for a little while. I want to say his first wife came with another one of the children. I think it was only 2 to 3 weeks later. I say only, that's an eternity to be away from your children.
And during that 3 weeks, you were living in the barn. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. A barn, right? Was there a toilet?
Yeah, there was a bathroom, and the food was made. There was also a house on this property, but all the children were in this barn. The house had his room in it, and again, still there was him being in his room a lot, receiving revelations is what seemed to be what was going on all the time. So the food would get brought out to the children and us ladies out there, and we just had to do the best we could with, same kind of stuff, keeping them busy, doing jobs where we could here and there, letting them have their playtime. I do remember that it was there, in our time there, that he had us throw away the toys all of a sudden. And I remember my personal feelings was, I'm going to let you tell that we don't have these toys, or this book was thrown away, because I know they're not going to be very happy about this. And I don't want to have to be the one to tell them. So, but I actually saved a couple of the children's favorite books, like Blueberries for Sal and Something from Nothing and I Love You Forever. There were some little books that I just couldn't get rid of.
Right. Well,
so
good for you.
I kind of kept them hid around in my stuff for a little while, but yeah, toys were thrown away at that time. We were there at R1 for about 1 month, and I can think of, like, his first wife came a few weeks later. Another one of the the mother that had born the children came to that place with another one of the ladies that had always been on the girls. So she showed up, and we were grateful. Any person that came that was regularly on children, when they got there, it was very helpful, because then we could split the children back up into their groups that they were used to being in. So for a little while there was double duty for some of us.
How did the children react to all of this? There's so many children without their mothers, and at first it was very hard to say goodbye and all of that. In this barn during this time, were they just trying to make the best of it, or were the children crying a lot? What was that?
No, I wouldn't say they were crying a lot. I read from Jaden's story that, they thought it was kind of fun. It was just a little different thing. But they did miss their mother. It was like, where's my mother?
Right.
I don't have any specific memories now of them coming to me and saying, how come my mother's not here, or anything like that. But I want to say it probably did happen. I do remember one incident there this just sticks out in my mind. Like, so there was an original home that was already on the land, and then there was just barn, but then they were building a home. So the construction and the building started immediately when men were called there. And there was a deadline, and men had been working 22 hours shifts trying to build this home, and it didn't get finished on time. And so this was just a small group of us at that time, but we were gathered into that original home, and Warren chastised us all and said that we all had doubt. Every single person there had some speck of doubt in them, and that's why the deadline was not met. So right off the bat, it was like, if we aren't perfect, then we were getting correction after correction after correction.
From your perspective, where do you think, and I know it's hard to, again, you can't really ever know what was going through Warren Jeff's head, right? But what was your perspective as to where he came up with these deadlines? Because obviously we know they were like never really attainable, like on the ranch, Texas, and the men are working 22-hour shifts. And every man that we've talked to that were on these construction crews, they're like, it was unattainable. The moment he said it, we knew that there's no way, even with guys not getting any sleep. And then that was slowing them down because they're so exhausted, but it never really seemed attainable. But if he was doing that from the very first project out the gate, did he say why he felt like it had to be so quick?
I can't remember exactly now, but I want to say he just wanted this stuff to happen so fast. He told us the purpose, and I can't remember if it was right off or later, but like the purpose of the lands of refuge was because there was going to be a time when the people in Short Creek were going to be scattered. And that we needed some place to go to send the faithful saints.
I see.
So I remember thinking, sometimes I think of my mindset back then, that's kind of crazy, but I thought anything he said was attainable if you had the faith.
Right.
You know, that was my mindset at the
because
time.
it was God saying it, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't Warren, it was God, because he was claiming all of this stuff was revelation, was coming from God. And so I bet that's what everyone was thinking.
Absolutely. So, but I just remember that specific training, like just, it was so heavy on each of us. It's like, man, it's our fault, you know? And I do remember having feelings there. Like, I do have a feeling there of thinking like, do I really want to be here? This is so hard. You know, you have to be so perfect. Can I do this? You know, but when he sensed that in people, he would send them away. If you got too vocal about that, then you would get sent away over it. So by the end of 2003 and the very beginning of 2004, then he started to move us to Texas, to R-17. Okay. I will point out here that before I left that place, I was aware that he had some younger ladies. And this is crazy, but I say this to help people see the mindset that you're in. Having a young sister wife like that get married, to me, I thought that woman was very special, or that girl was very special in the Lord's eyes, to be called when they were so young to get married. This is marriage by revelation, right? One of the particular ones that were there, he had told us that kind of the same story that Alicia told, that the Lord had showed him that the evil powers wanted to destroy her, or there were boys that would take her purity away. And so he had her come. Who knows if it was similar to Alicia's, where he told the father that she was just coming there, and then she got married to him after.
Right.
But when I found out she was there, she was married to him, because, you know, they would kiss in front of us and that kind of stuff. So,
and when you say young, I mean, I think it's important so that people know. I mean, are we talking 13?
This specific one was 13.
13, okay.
It wasn't the
She's
one
a
that everybody
child.
talks about, you know, in the raid and stuff. It was a different one.
Okay.
And she was the first one that we found out about. And then I got this feeling like, so here I go back to my feelings of your relationship with him and wanting to be one of those good wives that are chosen and a part of things. It felt like the ladies that were there were ladies that he could trust and that were moving forward with greater experiences with him. I thought that sometimes when they were in his room that they were seeing heavenly beings, honestly. And who doesn't want to be a part of some great manifestation, heavenly manifestation? That was my thinking at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard people say that that's what he would tell them, that it was this heavenly experience when they were with him. And I'm sure you'll talk more about heavenly sessions. But
I think I can pretty much say that the heavenly session thing hadn't started yet. And I did have one experience in the creek when I went in his room and I thought I felt that powerful feeling of the Spirit of God in there. None of that happened at that time of the crazy stuff, but so that's what I thought was going on in the room, was that they were maybe visiting heavenly beings, getting to see these great visions. And it's in the history of the church that, they had those great manifestations in the Kirtland Temple and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought. So by the beginning of January of 2004, he moved most of his children there. But I went through this little depression kind of feeling that now I finally got here where all the good ladies are, and now I'm being sent away to a different place. And it was just kind of like, again, just take care of my children. I had to battle with that. But it wasn't long before the rest of them came along, and then it was kind of like that was where you wanted to be, was at 17. So then I was like, okay, I guess it's not so bad. But just, the little feelings along the way of not being good enough always popped up here and there.
was there ever any talk about temple building at any of the other locations, or was that only Texas?
As far as I can remember, it was only at Texas.
Okay.
But after we left there, then it was real hush-hush. You didn't get to know about the other land and what was going on there. So once I left R1, then I didn't know. And sometimes he would travel there and give trainings and teachings and have meetings there. But I was at 17, so I heard what was at 17.
Yeah.
The first presidency was gathered there at R1.
Oh, really?
So not only did he, take the, split apart, or different families were coming to the land, but then he also called this another big test on the people, and he removed the first presidency from the people. So his two counselors came to that land.
Okay.
And so you can imagine the feeling of the people in Short Creek, Sam, that all of a sudden these men are gone.
Yep.
And
it was definitely humbling and kind of sad to be in Short Creek during that time, because so many people were moving away and they would not tell us anything. Like, we were just completely left out of it because, in my mind anyway, I wasn't worthy enough or good enough to know what was going on with the elite people. And so it was tough. And they would come, sometimes they would come back, but they wouldn't tell us anything.
right, if you ever got sent back, then that was your big directive, was don't talk about it and don't tell anything that's going on here. Because you were only supposed to find out if you were called by revelation to be there. So we get to R17, and then that was when the next big correction happened in Short Creek, when he corrected the 4 Jeff's brethren and the 4 Barlow brethren.
Okay, so that was, wow. I didn't realize that much happened
before
the correction.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, but you look at the timeline; it was only 1 year, and he had only been the prophet for 1 year, and all this happened in 1 year.
Sheesh.
Yeah. So again, it was another one of those, pray for me, the Lord's having me do this. So here we were in Texas now, praying for him that the people would accept the Lord's will and that he would be protected from harm and danger. It's basically what we were told to pray for. Did you ever,
because you were in a position now where the so-called elite people were, did you ever hear a good reason for him kicking out those men?
It's hard to remember the revelation exactly, but more so it was just like I don't think it was stated publicly why.
Okay.
But see, Short Creek heard what we heard.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you
So-
heard more than we did.
No, it
Okay.
was the same revelation. I
Okay.
can't even remember if he said anything or if it was just, if they'd been aspiring or something. I don't know. I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, there was something. I was pretty young at that time, but it was that they were not willing to do something, or that they were trying to go behind his back and teach false doctrine or something along those lines, and that they weren't being obedient to him. But I mean, talk about just blowing up the community. I mean, these were 4 men that were very well respected, were great friends to like my father. I mean, my father going home, he looked as white as a ghost. He was like, "What just happened?" So it was a disaster, honestly.
Yeah, and so many people lived in fear. Like, if I don't do exactly what he says, then I'm going to lose everything.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and then some people when it started happening so much, it was just like it was only a matter of time when it was going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. So here we are at this land that was not hardly any living spaces. We came at the very first of it. There was, again, one original house that had already been on the land. They brought in 3 trailers at first, and us ladies with the children lived in these 3 trailers. We had a boy trailer, a girl trailer, and a mother's trailer. At one point, I and the other mother that did boys all the time lived in a room with, I want to say, 7 to 9 boys in there. And so at first it was squishy, and but at the same time it was kind of fun and exciting. It was different. We had some tents set up. He didn't ever encourage the children to sleep in the tents. He didn't make the children sleep in the tents. He always looked after the children and the elderly and made sure that they were well taken care of. And he let the ladies that didn't have any children, sleep in the tents.
I see.
But that didn't last for very long. It was just a little while. I taught school in a tent. School just kept going on. I just kept teaching 2nd grade wherever we went. We had put all their school stuff in these crates and just took them around with the children wherever they went. So lots of, kind of fun memories. We, of course, right off the bat, he started telling us to dig cactus. That was something we could do with the children, and eventually we were told that the cactus was a curse on the land, and eventually we were supposed to have all the cactus removed.
Wow.
Off of this land in Texas. And digging rocks. I remember one day he came, and all the children went for a walk with him, and we were out by what was going to be a garden area, and the children were digging the rocks, and just thinking it was so cool to dig up this rock out of the ground. And he said, "Look, ladies, they're excited over a rock." And he was delighted that this could be successful. Like the children could be happy here, is what I felt like he was saying. No, it wasn't this get out there and work a certain amount of hours and all this stuff. It was, ladies, be inspired how long the children can work, and try to go out in the morning hours when it wasn't so hot. Be thoughtful of that. Bring them in during the hot hours of the day and do stuff in the house, which was hard to do stuff in the trailers at first.
Yeah.
We started little projects like building a path, because right after that they started building the 3 buildings. One was to be a storehouse, one was his home, a home for his family, and then one was a duplex for 2 of the other men that had come very first on the...
Are these the log homes that we see in the pictures? Okay. Was the temple also being built at this point?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not at first. So this is the beginning of 2004. More people were gathered. I will say that my stepdaddy came and my mother came not too long after I had come.
Oh, wow.
So I was pretty delighted and pretty blessed, lucky to be able to have her there. I remember taking my boys out to their trailer. By the time she came, we had moved into the big home. Taking the boys out there and helping them get settled in their trailer. And that's kind of how it worked. As more homes got done, the families that had been there moved into the homes and out of those trailers. And then as more families would come, they would go into those trailers.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a rotation to get people in better living conditions.
Was Warren's revelations on who should show up to these to Texas, was it based on like when the space opened up, then he would get a revelation that someone else should be coming, or?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
Not putting two and two together. It was like that. It was just whenever he said somebody was going to come, then they did. I remember a big project when that first home was being built. The men were working on the meeting house started getting built too.
Oh, okay.
At the very beginning. And I don't know if we were trying to meet a deadline for the meeting house or what, but the ladies were working on, we built these 3 bed bunks just in the back patio of the house there, because we moved into this house, but we didn't have any sleeping quarters. So the ladies worked together with the grandmother of the family that was very industrious. She did the garden and everything. So she was kind of over that, and so we built all these bunk beds. So then Warren's house was full of these 3 bunk beds in ladies' rooms and children's rooms.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of the ladies lived on these 3 bunk beds for a little while in that house.
Wow.
Oh, so here's a pertinent story. When we were still at the trailers, it was always, we can't be seen by the Gentiles. We can't be seen by the Gentiles. So one day I was out with the boys, and they were clearing out this big piece of land for the garden, the huge garden. And I didn't know anything or know what was going on, but I had still been out there with the 3 boys. And we saw one of the priested men. I say priested man, he was just one of the men that was working there. We went up to him and shook his hand and said hi. I did that for the boys' sake. It wasn't me trying to say hi to the men, but when the boys saw a priested man, I would try to help them be respectful and say hello. Mm-hmm. So we were doing that, and then all of a sudden I realized that there was a Gentile right there. And I was like, what? And I was so scared because I got seen, and the children got seen by this person. And I remember the man just kind of like, go on, go on, go on. And so I just gathered them up and went to the trailers, but it got reported to Warren, and I remember that heavy feeling of like, am I going to be sent away because I got seen? And he talked to me on the phone, and I just basically begged for forgiveness. I was like, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. And he basically told me to be inspired, be more inspired, to be, if you're inspired, you'll know where to be and you won't be seen.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Wait, so this was on the ranch that the Gentile was there?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, I didn't think they would allow anyone.
Yeah, I can't remember. There was, at the beginning there was a few reasons why they needed to come in and check on things or something.
I see.
They were told that it was going to be a place where they were going to be hunting a lot. Oh. And so I don't know if it was some reason for that, or
so maybe an inspector of some kind.
Yeah,
I see.
Something like that probably. So pretty quick we moved into that house. July of 2004, I was sent away for 2 months. I went back to Short Creek, and while I was gone, then he handled my stepdaddy, and he was corrected and sent away.
Were you told what you were sent away for?
At this point, yes, this particular one I was.
I've had a lot of people say that they either didn't even know what they were corrected for, or didn't even know why they were sent away. So at least you were told why, and then
I was told why in this particular time. And so I went back, but I didn't even put 2 and 2 together that, did he do that so I wouldn't be there when my stepdaddy was corrected? Because he knew I loved my stepdaddy so much, so very, very much. And when I went back to Short Creek, I remember getting a phone call from him personally telling me that my stepdad had been corrected. And because I had been there and knew what was going on, I was so yearning to go back. Then my response was, it doesn't matter to me, I just want to be with you. I did have the feelings within, why is this happening?
Yeah. And
I will point out here, too, that's important to me in trying to process everything that happened and why it happened. I do remember very vividly, a time when Warren came out of his office in Short Creek. It was before we left. And he was speaking particularly about my stepdad. And I used to could remember exactly what he said, but now I can't remember the words, but I remember the feeling in my heart. And I said to myself, why did he say that? Father is a good man. And everybody respected him, and he was, anyway, I just had that question in my mind, but I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And so, like you try to put two and together. Did he have something against him, Claire, before that? Before we even went there? Because my stepfather wasn't there for very long before the correction started there, and men started being sent away from there as well.
Yeah. See, I wonder that, or if he already had something against him, or if it was the fact that maybe your stepfather or stepdad said one thing that went against what Warren felt was the way things should be, and he felt threatened by that. I mean, because we have heard stories where if anyone dared to share their opinion that varied from the opinion of Warren Jeffs, that was the end of them being welcome. So I wonder if something as simple as that could have happened.
And, I've never asked him personally, all the details of that story.
Right.
But that's what happened to me. And it was, as I've reconnected with him, he does remember vividly the day that I was leaving. And he couldn't figure out why I was going. And even Warren's mom said, I have no idea why he is sending her away.
So when you went back to Short Creek, did you go back to the same house you were in before?
I did. So I went back to the property, and we were in that, we called it the South House, Warren's South Home. And I got to experience there, while I was there for those 2 months, Warren's family leaving the property in Short Creek. And that was a big thing, because we had these two huge houses. All the mothers and children were gone. Some of the ladies that had, I mentioned that some of the mothers with the smaller ones had left before that. They went into hiding in the creek. They were still in the creek, but they were at relatives' places or somewhere, wherever they were told to go. And so then this was happening to the rest of the family, which was just ladies by this time. I feel like maybe there was a few older children. I can't remember exactly, but we took all the remaining furniture and everything and gathered it down into the dining room of the addition. And now that huge, more massive dining room. Yeah. And it was like a miniature Walmart. I mean, we had lamps in one section, dressers in one, all sectioned off and all these things. And whatever happened with that, I have no idea. I know it got put in storage units or whatever, and who knows. When you left, you were supposed to take your bare minimums. And that was another thing. It was like you were sacrificing your earthly things to go to Zion. And you weren't supposed to have your heart set on your earthly things. Like I had a cedar chest that had a little jumper I wore when I was little. And I always wanted to put that on my little girl. I had saved it. So when I had a little girl, I could dress her in it. And all that was just lost. Anything that you had that was sentimental value was just, you couldn't take it with you. It was, again, that principle of sacrificing all earthly things was what I felt like was the reason we had to do all that. When I got back, then this is when I was made aware about the Heavenly Session stuff starting. Or I want to say it was, at first he started with like just a training where were given this revelation or read this revelation, and he made it sound like it was at the end of section 132, Joseph Smith says, or the Lord says, and I, the Lord, will reveal more concerning this. And he pointed that out, that was...
Continuation.
Yeah, this was what the Lord wanted. More training, more light given on this subject.
He always used scripture, didn't he? To make it seem like what he was saying was accurate and that it made sense and easier to follow what he said. It's tricky.
So also, I'll make mention when you went there, as time went on, there was like a series of ordinances that you were supposed to be preparing for and that you had to have to prepare you to go into the temple. And I don't know the LDS history enough. I'm assuming it probably followed that, because it felt like Warren was just repeating history and doing what Joseph Smith was doing. I will mention, this is kind of going back a little bit, like before we left Short Creek, he was starting to fill again like the high council and ordaining men to these different callings that had not happened for years in the church.
No.
I think at one point I do remember even like realizing that the apostleship was going to get filled again
I heard that.
when it had been
A one-man rule
vacant
for a long time.
Yeah, just the prophet, and he was the only one that had the apostleship for all those years. So the ordinances and stuff like that continued there, and that was kind of one of the things you were reaching for and looking forward to, was to get these ordinances.
So as far as ordinances went, so these were all starting before temple, right? Which kind of is like more Joseph Smith vibe there.
Before the temple was built?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like in preparation to be used to build the temple and then to go into the temple.
Okay, because that is one thing that being raised mainstream LDS, like we always looked at the FLDS and thought, how can you guys be fundamentalists without a temple, right? And then when like I saw pictures of the FLDS temple and I was like, this isn't exactly what I would have pictured either. Like it's not, there are similarities and there are huge differences between inside the LDS temple and inside the FLDS and what it showed. But if they were doing most of the ordinances before going into the temple, did you have washings and anointings and endowments?
No, that didn't happen till in the temple.
Oh, okay. So that was in the temple. So you had other ceremonies then.
Right. It was, and I don't know if he made these up or if he found them from Joseph Smith's teachings or what, but one was called having the love of God sealed in your mind and heart.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
And then obviously to be able to help with the temple, then you had to be set apart as a temple worker and a temple builder.
Okay.
Temple worker, yes. Temple builder, not so much in the mainstream LDS.
But you do have to have a temple recommend in order to work on the temple.
Oh, do you?
I believe so. Like, or the contractor or the person. There's definitely like very strict requirements on who's allowed to work on the temple, the LDS temples as well. So I know they try as hard as they can to keep it with people who are going to consider it sacred. So I guess that's similar too. But
Yeah, so those things were happening, and this is always constantly in your mind that you're trying to prepare and prove worthy. But also a lot of the time, deadlines were supposed to be being met and weren't being met, and corrections were being given in a lot of the trainings. It was an amazing experience. It wasn't just super fun. It was very, just kind of weighed you down a lot, because even though we were supposed to be these special elect people that got called there, in my opinion, it was just we were called to go through the experience first, because it wasn't just super wonderful.
did it seem like as time went on that he was like correcting more people more frequently? Like that's what it seems like from the outside. It seems like he went from, a couple people here to where it seemed like there were like constant corrections.
Yeah, and then definitely when it came to like the United Order days in Short Creek then in 2010 and stuff, and it was just like
That's
more
where
and
it
more
got
often.
really crazy. Yes.
But here at Texas at this point, Warren Jeff's like, he's not in prison yet.
Yeah.
He's not really on the run yet either, is he?
Well,
Like
he was
full
always
run?
on the run. I mean,
Okay.
and I was trying to remember exactly when he got on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted. I don't remember exactly, but he would, like when he came there, he had to be so careful. We weren't supposed to obviously talk about it, or like the men couldn't talk about it to their families, because I do believe that sometimes the men were allowed to call their families and kind of teach them. They couldn't reveal the new truths that were being given there in Texas, but just he would call them and say, prepare your family so that they can come as well. I do want to say about the Heavenly Wife stuff. At that point, I was made aware that it was happening, but I did not experience the experience for quite another while. It was a whole nother year and a few months before I personally ever experienced it. Whatever others went through, that's their story. But so just to think of it, like he became the prophet in 2002, moved the people by 2003, and then by the end of 2004, this crazy stuff was being introduced.
Wow.
So
And
I don't know.
You said that it kind of first got introduced in like lessons first.
Yeah, it was
and that
like-
it was the continuation of 132.
Yeah, it was a revelation, just kind of teaching you about it, that this was going to happen. Sometimes at that beginning training, he would have the ladies take their clothes off in front of the other ladies. I've kind of to, I guess, get you used to that was what was going to be happening.
And that was a part of the training.
Yeah, that was just kind of, I don't know how to say it, but just the beginning. Yeah.
I mean, based on the way that you were all raised, you know, and the fact that you have to be completely covered all the time, and just the strict rules about that, to go from that to, I mean, how awkward that must have been.
Yeah, it was very awkward. My personal feelings was I didn't question him, but it was not comfortable for me. But I did not dare question him. And if this is what you had to do to be a part of the greater celestial training, then so I'm embarrassed about it now, but it's just, it was the mindset that I was in at the time.
Well, and you didn't know any, like, you don't know any better at that point, right? Like if a prophet, and at that point you believe somebody's the prophet and that everything they're saying is coming from God, then like, why would you act any differently than being obedient to that?
The year of 05 was I think that was the big year of building the temple. There was crews, like you had to have the temple worker, temple builder blessing to be able to even help with, like, everything in there had to be, and even in the homes there on the land, had to be homemade. So all the furniture was homemade.
Oh, wow.
So there was a big push on making chairs and tables and beds and dressers and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of hard work being done there. And when they talk about all the money that was being called to be used, and Warren was taking it, he wasn't just using it for himself. Obviously that's how he got around as well, but he had this group of people now that was doing all this, that somehow all that had to be paid for. So I dare say that's where a lot of the money went to as well.
Yeah.
And then of course all the people needed fed, so
Right.
There was the storehouse there and everything. I mean, my experiences pretty much stayed the same. I was either teaching school, doing children. When the special projects started, when you were able to help with them, like I remember getting up at 2:00 in the morning and going down and working on the upholstery work on the chairs from 2 to 5, let's say, in the morning, because I was always on children. And then I had to go home and still be at my duties for the day. Still go teach school and be with the children. But we tried to offset it, so that you could still have some sleep and rest, and just everybody was having to work together to accomplish all this stuff that was.
So was his only
needing to be
purpose
done.
then having children there just because he was scared of the cops? Because if you're going to go and you're going to work people 22 hours a day and you're building, it seems like it would be more conducive to leave all the children in Short Creek, leave them at home, send a bunch of adults to go get the work done. I can't imagine having a bunch of little children basically on one big construction site for years on end. Sounds like it would be not worth the hassle.
Yeah, I don't know exactly his purpose in doing that, other than maybe he wanted him where he could see him, because he didn't go back to Short Creek much.
I see.
At first, like, he told the family, I'm never coming back. So that was the pressure put on the family there that didn't go with us the first time. But he did end up going back a few times here and there. He was very adamant about school being done there. He would always say, if we don't have our children in school during school hours, the government can come in upon us. So again, school was very, very important there. When I hear about what was happening in the Creek, it's really sad, because it seems like the education there went to pot.
Oh, yeah. It just was non-existent after a time. Yeah.
As I mentioned before, like, we were working on our own curriculum there. It got more so later after he was taken, but the teachers worked hard there too. We had to just figure it out. We didn't get to go buy new books every year and stuff. Everything was copied, And you were constantly working on trying to make the pictures appropriate for Zion and the words appropriate for Zion and different things like that. So, but I enjoyed it. I loved teaching second grade. I loved that age. Oh, so we move into '06, and this is when, beginning of '06 was when I experienced a heavenly session. I try not to get too detailed, but yet state enough that people know the truth. So I was down teaching, and somebody came and said, Warren wants you to come up to his room. We were in this practice of always kneeling down and saying a prayer before you went in his room. But this particular time I went into his office first and was basically explained that the Lord had named me to be a part of one of this experience. And another thing to point out for us ladies, to be a part of one of these was the only way now that we could have a child. You had to prove worthy to be in one of these to be able to bear forth a child, because he wasn't going to be doing the intimate life like he had in the past. So that's another pressure that was on all of us ladies. So I get called up there. There was a preparation before it happened where you would go in, and the ladies, you showered, so everything, you were clean. And the ladies washed each other, and there was a prayer. The way he told us about it was you had to have a constant prayer, praying the whole time that your priesthood, which was him, would be blessed, so that your mind didn't wander and it wouldn't be an immoral act. So it's like if you were constantly praying and doing it right, then this was a heavenly, celestial thing. But if you let your mind wander and you were just doing it for earthly pleasure, then it was bad. So, so there was a preparation first so that everything you were clean. I walked in the room, and he had said this was a way that he would be, when he atoned for the people, then he came close to death in atoning for the people. And this was his revival. Us ladies being with him was the way that he would basically come back to life, because he would become so low in that experience. When I experienced it, I didn't witness anything then with like him going through atonement, but I forgot there was a couple times in a family training in the living room, like he was up there and his body went into these convulsions, and we were like, I think by that time I understood the concept of, what was happening when that happened. But two ladies walked him out of the room when that happened. And that happened one time in general meeting down in the meeting house.
Oh, wow.
And he was removed automatically from the room.
Okay. And that was him supposedly atoning for the sins of the people.
Yes, going into an atonement session.
Jeez.
Yeah. Back to my certain experience, he was laying there, so I didn't witness any of that in this experience. And it was ladies working together, helping excite each other to help bring him back. And then, you sat there and watched each lady, it's yucky to think about now, and at the time my feelings were like, just do what you're supposed to do. I had to leave the room because of a certain thing that happened with me personally. Not anything about him, but just I had to go in the bathroom, and I wasn't really able to participate with the rest of it, but I got to just kind of witness it. And when it was all done, then it was like he had his strength back and he was alive and well, and then there was always a little, I don't know, it seems like I remember us kind of sitting around talking, and he gave each of us a hug and said, "Thank you, ladies," and whatever. And at that time he said to me, something, I remember him saying, "Finally, Amy, you like me." Remember all that time he had said, "When are you going to like me again? When are you going to like me again?" And so he brings that up at that time.
Oh my gosh. The manipulation.
Yes.
Oh,
So, this also was the year so that was in March when that experience happened. In May, then one of the ladies was called to leave the land, and she had a little girl that was just barely over 1 year old. She had turned 1 at the end of April, and in May, he had her leave with one of her children, another one of her children, her son, that was younger. And if I remember right, this little guy was being sent because he needed to be more obedient. And his mother was sent with him to help him. And she had not had the experience in the previous experience of having the children taken away. Her children were not taken from her. Well, her oldest was, but the 2 younger ones weren't. Well, and this little baby girl hadn't even been born yet when we left the creek. So I felt like, I think of that dear lady, and she finally got her baby girl, and then he required this of her to be removed from her little baby girl.
And how old was the child that was being corrected?
I want to say he was 3 or 4 at the most. Yeah.
So you're sending away a 3-year-old for not being perfectly obedient at 3.
wow.
So
It makes my blood boil.
yeah. So I became her sole caregiver. I remember going through the line after a family training, and he held my hand and he said, "The Lord, that's directed that you be," and I'm going to call her little one's caregiver. And he just said, "Do your best. I know you can do this." And sometimes I wonder if, like, by this time, if his heart was being a little softened for how I hadn't had a child yet. And maybe he was giving me this experience. I guess maybe he felt like I had proven worthy and passed the test and was sweet about it or something. I don't know. These are all just the things that run through my head as I try to contemplate. I noticed, so the day her mother left, I was a school teacher. She was used to, there was another little girl that was her age and her mother. They kind of worked together. I hadn't been on this that young a group of children for a while. When I came back, that first time I had been sent away, then I got things switched around and I got put on girls instead of boys. So I had been having these different, and they were older girls. Anyway, so here I get put on this little baby girl, and I just gave it my all and treated that child like she was my own. I did have to, but the day her mother left, I was at school, and I knew she was leaving that day, and I remember trying to get back up to the house before she left so that I could be there. But by the time school ended and I got up there, her mother had already left, and she had been left under the care of the other mother that had a girl her age. And they had done a lot of things together. So she knew that mother and was comfortable with her. But so at first, in that little girl's mind, it was just like, oh, I'm going to be with this mother, probably. Then I got home, and I was told that the mother of the child was already gone. So I gathered her up after school, and she wasn't completely weaned.
I was thinking that, I'm like, at 1?
I think she was still nursing at night, but wasn't nursing in the day. She got on solids for the day. But so here again, I'm put in that situation of being the one that I look back at now, and I'm like, God, please forgive me for being a part of taking children away from their mothers. That's not me. That's not my heart. That's not how I am. I wouldn't want to do that to anybody. At the same time, I just went full force. I'm going to do everything I can to make this child feel loved and comfortable. And I did notice right off, like, she had already started talking before her mother left. And then after her mother left, she digressed and she quit talking. And our dear grandmother that always would sit up at the dining room table, by this time, a lot of the family was there. Most of the grandmothers were there. And she would sit there and, the children would come in and she'd be a sweet grandmother to them. But she was like, Amy, she's different. And she would point out little pointers to me here and there. Make sure you're doing this, make sure this. And I really appreciated that. Just a sensitive, sweet grandmother. Slowly but surely, she came out of it.
How long was her mother sent away for?
It was a little over a year.
A year?
And so I personally chose to keep her mother alive in her life, obviously. I would show her pictures of her mother, talk about her mother to her. This little girl had a little yellow pillow that was her comfort. As children often do, they have a blanket or a pillow or whatever. She had a little yellow pillow. And she was like that before her mother left, but after her mother left, man, if that got taken away from her or was lost somewhere for a minute or whatever, she literally threw a screaming fit. I went through another year then this is also the year Warren was taken. Okay, so I was put over her in May, just doing my best to take care of this little girl. Sometimes I remember before Warren was taken, him calling and saying, like he'd ask the lady that answered the phone. There was one phone on the land. It was supposed to be a secure phone that wasn't a dirty phone. We called these things dirty phones when like a non-clean phone called that phone.
Yeah.
So anyway, she would answer the phone and he would be like, how's Amy and little one doing? And I remember her telling him that, she's just a darling mother. She does a wonderful job. I think she came and told me that or something. Hey, Warren asked about you today, and I told him this and this. And I said, well, thank you, I do remember before he was taken little times that he would come to the land and trying to help her. The children that were born after we went there, they didn't really have a relationship with their father. It was hard. Some of them, it was a little more natural. Her little one was a little slower to have that relationship. And so bad, I wanted this for her. I had seen that in other sister wives where when we had lived in the creek, their children were able to have a bond with their father. And then even some of them that were pretty small when all that happened and we left and he became the leader, the prophet and everything, then those younger ones didn't have that same connection and bond. That's where I had my focus when we found out he was taken and was apprehended. I just remember we were gathered in the living room by his second counselor. He came in and told us that Uncle Warren had been apprehended. I didn't even know what that word meant. I wondered for a second, but then I caught on by the look of everybody's faces and stuff, that meant that he was arrested. It was just very sober, and again, that empty feeling. But then also it was I was like, this isn't going to last long. He's going to get out. He's the prophet, so this can't, this is just a little test, and he's going to get out of prison right away.
Yeah.
Was my thoughts. The temple was completed before he was taken, and I was never a part of anything, but I do remember seeing that some things were happening. There were some people, and whether they actually went into the temple, because there was a building before you went into the temple. And I think I'm kind of just going by what I wondered, but I felt like that room was like a preparation, or that little building was a preparation building before you went into the temple. I cannot speak for if people actually went in the temple and things were done in the temple even before he was taken, because I was never a part of it. Also, 1 month before he was taken, that's when throughout this time, we did find out about more younger ladies getting married. Again, I explained to you my mindset at the time. I just thought it was it was awesome. We got another sister wife, but often with these younger ones, what happened was they were kind of put under another lady, an older lady. And he did try to give them their education and have them continue school and stuff like that. But it was a hit and miss. I mean, it wasn't anything that was super consistent.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mingled among the family with them. I mean, had to do with some of them. Some of them I hardly had anything to do, but I knew of them, you know.
Was there any indication or any reason why it seemed like he was bringing so many young girls to be married?
I don't remember, other than like that first one I found out about. You know, we were told that the evil powers were coming after her or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And this was her protection. So that's kind of what my thought was then after that. Or else that she had been so mature or whatever to be called at such a young age to become a mother or to get married.
Yeah.
I didn't even really think, and this is another thing I just marvel at now that I'm in a different mindset. Like, that's not okay for these little girls to have these relationships that young.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So-
or in like, do you know if any of them were involved, like in the heavenly sessions?
I didn't experience the one I did with any of them, but I did know of them being in the family.
In the
So-
family. Sorry, one more question. I hope you don't mind. It was just in my head for a little bit there. How, Warren's atoning for sins, right? Which is pretty sacrilegious when it comes to mainstream Christianity or general Christianity, the idea of someone other than the Savior atoning for sins.
Yeah.
And then having these, heavenly sessions being brought back from those. Do you know how often he claimed that was happening? Like, was he claiming to atone for sins all the time, and so he had to have these sessions to bring him back all the time? Or was it a rare occurrence that this was?
I can't totally speak for that, but I can say, I wouldn't say it's just, I don't know, because I was only a part of that one, but I did often see and knew that things were happening. Ladies were being called into his room. I can't say that it was every single day, and it seemed like, I want to say maybe the severity of the atonement was different. Like,
Okay.
maybe, anyway, it just...
Okay.
Hard to know exactly,
Yeah.
but it definitely
But it wasn't like a
happened
once or
frequently.
twice thing ever.
Oh, no,
and then
it was a lot more than that.
Okay.
It was a lot more than that. And after most of the ladies were trained and knew about it and participated in it, it was happening at the different lands of refuge that he was going to.
Okay.
So-
If it was a part of scripture, was it something like, were other men having these experiences, or was it a purely for only the prophet?
At that time, he had said it was only for him. And he actually, one person told me she remembers him saying that if any other man was to do this, he would be in the wrong.
Of course.
So...
Wow. Yikes.
So throughout the time I had this little one, there was very little communication between her and her mom. I remember a time or two her calling. Maybe there was some letters and stuff. But a year later, then I had the experience of her mother returning. And it's another tender story for me. Because when she came back, I could only imagine her feelings. And I wanted the little one to just jump in her arms and, remember Mom right off the bat. I had done what I could to keep her alive, her memory alive in her mind. And the day her mother came back, I remember her walking up the deck stairs, and I had the little girl in my arms. And I said, "There's Mother." And even by then, even when you were talking to the child's own mother, you would say, "Mother so-and-so." So I called her Mother so-and-so by her name, to her. And I was like, "We love her so much. We're so happy she's home, And I went to put her out to go to her mother, and she just went right back into my chest. And I was devastated. I didn't know what her mother was going to do. And I just wanted her mother to know that in my heart, that's what I truly had wanted. I looked up at her and I tried again, and she didn't really want to go to her mother. And then I think we both had tears in our eyes, and I said, I'm so sorry. And she said, it's okay. It's okay. She was so sweet and so understanding. Then she was very sweet about just going at it slow. She didn't just come in and grab the child from me, and, she just slowly worked her way back into her life. And she had this little thing that she would only let me get her ready for bed in her pajamas. And I felt like that was her little way, that was her comfort. She didn't want anybody else doing that. And so one night her mom said, can I get her ready for bed? And I was like, ooh, that's a tender one. But I said, you can try. I was just kind of worried about what the little one would do. And she carefully, sweetly took her around to where her pajamas were, and she got her ready for bed. And I was like, okay, we're breaking the ice here. She's starting to remember her mother and remember that there's something between them. Yeah. And her mother and I have always had a very sweet relationship since that experience. She came to me once and said, Amy, you could have turned her any way you wanted, and I can't thank you enough for keeping me in her life. And as time went on, she tried to do the same, though we were separated a lot in the years to come. I want to say she was more so with her mother after that, but she would always, keep my memory in her mind, remind her about me. So I believe it is possible to share when you have experiences like that. Yeah. Okay, so that was 2007. Next big experience was the experience of Warren calling and telling us that he was no longer the prophet. That was devastating. I had been down at school. This happened before her mother came back, if I remember. It was all within, I think this happened in February, and her mother didn't come back till right after she turned 2 in April. So I think this was in February when he called and said that to all of us. It was just a phone call from the prison, and that had been like the ritual, I guess you might say. When he would get phone time, then we would gather in the living room, and at first it was, saying hi to the family, and then it turned to, here, I'll do a I'll do training with you. And so he would give a training through the year. Okay, so this experience happened first. So he calls and told us that he was no longer the prophet. Let's see, I'm trying to remember some of the details. It's unforgettable, but yet I'm trying to remember how it all happened. Like, I remember running up I was down at the school, and his voice started talking, and it just sounded really different. And went running up the path to be at the house where he was talking, and said he was not the prophet, that he had been. We did not hear, as far as I can remember, we did not hear him say that he had done things to his daughter and his sister, where some people say that he said that at that time. I don't know if that was said privately on the phone before he got on speaker, because sometimes he would call and talk to the phone answer, is what we called it, which was usually his mother. I just do remember hearing his voice, saying that things were going to be handed over to somebody else, and that's who we should look to, and then his goodbye. It was just a dreadful goodbye, and all of us were bawling and crying. And my personal experience at that time was like, I didn't know how to process it. And I wonder, for me, it was like kind of in that where you were watching everybody else and how they're going through it, and then it's kind of like, oh, okay, this is how I'm supposed to act. Yeah. Because everybody else there was other people that were more inanimate, like they just knew right off the bat that this was a test. There's no way that this would happen, because we were taught that the Lord would never the Lord would never let the prophet lead the people astray, or the prophet would never be led astray, something like that. Anyway, so trying to process it after he said goodbye, I was kind of talking with one of the other ladies, and I was like, well, he used to always say if anything happened to him, then to turn to Father, which was Father Ruin. And so then I was just confused in my mind, like, what do we do? But then he also had said he told his ladies that they had now belonged to a different man.
Oh, wow.
And that was kind of interesting and weird to process.
And that was before he said he wasn't the prophet? Did he said you belong to a different man?
Well, it was during that same...
During the same
phone
call?
call.
Yeah.
Did he give... So, in the call that you heard, he didn't give a reason to why he was no longer the prophet?
I can't remember. I've heard that recording since, in different things on the internet, but like some of it I can remember, but some of it's like, did I hear that? Or was it like, because the phone answers could flip off the intercom so that we couldn't hear some things, and then they could flip it back on. So it's kind of hard to remember exactly everything, and I don't know the details of what was going on with the people that answered the phone.
Wow.
I want to say like he called first and was kind of talking to them first, and then it was like, put me on speaker and talking to everybody. So we had his second counselor and he was also the bishop there in Texas. He come in and he's like, everybody hang tight. We're not taking another step. We're just, and so then it was kind of like left to everybody to, again, go to the Lord and get your testimony of what you felt through that experience and what you felt like now. And we didn't hear from him for, I want to say, a couple weeks.
Oh, wow.
And then when he called again, it was like he asked, after talking out loud to everybody, he would ask for each lady individual. And I remember getting on the phone with him and him asking me, what is your testimony of what has happened? And my personal experience was, at first I was just kind of lost. And then one of the ladies got up and bore her testimony. And she brought up the story of Enoch and how the Lord had said, Enoch more and more wasn't among the people. And then he was finally telling the people to just go and don't listen to him or whatever. But it was the people that stuck with it and stayed at it that were blessed. And so that made a lot of sense to me. I thought, okay, well, if this is just a test, then we just got to keep going, So hearing other people's testimonies is kind of, I felt, for me, that's what turned me in that direction at that point. Because before, I just remember feeling very lost. I didn't know what.
Probably felt like a trick question. Like, what kind of... Can someone give me the answer to the trick question? Because I feel like either way, it's going to be wrong.
Yeah, seriously.
Then I remember the story of Abraham and Isaac. And when we had been told that story, it was like the Lord has the right to test his servants in any way he wants. And so for me personally, I used that story and thought, this is just a test. The Lord has the right to do this to his servant. And he is still the servant. And then that was my mindset. So then when he started calling again, we would all say things like, we love you, we know you're the prophet, we'll stand with you forever, all those kind of, then he got those reassuring words from his family after he started calling back. So
how long did it take him before he said, just kidding,
This was a test.
I'm a prophet, that was a test?
As far as I can remember, it was only a couple weeks at the most, maybe a couple months.
Okay. The interesting thing to me is I've heard the phone call as well. Well, the phone call that's available to hear.
Yeah.
And he specifically says, I am not the prophet. This is not a test. He says those words. This is not a test. So were you guys like, haha, just kidding. That's, you got to be playing with us here.
Yeah. I mean, it was like you didn't want to believe that because we just knew that I mean, you've come so far in this redemption of Zion mission. It's like that couldn't happen now.
Right. After everything. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
So just more of working with children. You're trying to do everything you can to keep them busy and doing school again until the next big experience is the raid of 2008.
So during that time, Warren Jeffs is in prison, and he's still sending out revelations. Was he still sending out like timelines for buildings, or that you said the temple was completed at that time?
Yeah, the temple had been completed before he was taken.
So were there temple ordinances being
No.
done, or was everything just on pause? Like
Yeah.
he's gonna be out, he's gonna be released, so we're just gonna like put life on pause until...
Yeah, it was kind of like when he first became the prophet, when he said all the priesthood ordinance stopped. And he said there wasn't going to be any more marriages except for, like, I remember thinking the young people had to be super prayerful and sweet and to even get that blessing. But he did do some marriages before he left the creek again. But so after he was taken, as far as I know, and experienced, everything that had been going towards the advancement of ordinances in the temple stopped. But the building continued.
Okay.
More land, more houses. I'm not sure if like the completion of the temple was only the temple, because then there was a printing press. The building that's right next to it was supposed to be the printing press where all of, the revelations and all our books would be printed and stuff like that. So just continued on with that until it was April of 2008. I had been down in my classroom after school I remember looking around my classroom thinking, what do I need to bring up? Went up to the house, and there was this bustle going on around with everybody that, like, Gentiles were coming on the land. He had had this kind of practice, if anybody needed to come on the land through the building permits and whatever, if there was a reason for a Gentile to be on the land, that we had to go to our rooms and stay in our rooms the whole time and pray. And so it didn't matter, all the mothers, all the children. You had to go to your bedrooms and just pray. That was our practice of if somebody was going to be on the land that wasn't called to be there.
I see.
I went up there, and like there was this, talk about people coming on the land. That night, I think I just went to bed with the little one. So her mother was back, but she had, during this particular experience, she had gone to see Warren in prison. So I, again, was her sole caretaker through this experience. I was there. I just went to bed with her. Wasn't involved with a lot of people. Spend a lot of time taking videos and pictures and, just spying on everything, what was happening. I just took care of little one. And the next day, I remember the bishop trying really hard. Like, the girls were being interviewed down there at the school, and he had everybody else get interviewed before. He was trying to not let the prophet's family get involved. He was willing to let his family go first before the prophet's family. And so, but eventually, they started taking away some of the older girls from the mothers, and then they came up to our house. We called that the big house at the time, and later it was also called the original when that new house was built a few years later. But so we were in the original home there. This was a big H in the shape of the letter H house. They had built for his family, and his family had moved into. They came and knocked on our door, and they had brought in, all these military vehicles and men with guns, and it was scary because here we were. We had no weapons as far as I know, us ladies and children, and as far as I know, even the men. There might have been a few guns on the land because there was some, killing of the deer and stuff for our meat. So there was some, but it's like, as far as all of every household being equipped with guns, that just wasn't what happened. That wasn't how it was. They came in, the CPS worker came in, and us having that ritual of going to our rooms and praying, we had gone to the living room and started singing. And she came in and started explaining to us what was happening. You know, that somebody had called, or I can't even remember all the details. I just remember being there holding little one. And one lady that got up there, she was shaking like a leaf. And she was starting to talk to us. And we thought, see, they're so scared of us. And they don't even need to be scared. We're not scary people. You know. And where we're like, see, they knew they were doing wrong from the first. And that was our mindset at the time. So basically explained to us that they were going to be taking all the mothers and the children. Well, all the children, and that the mothers could come with them. And so a whole bunch of us just kind of stood up, and we were like, okay, I guess, you know, we're ready to go. And one of the men stepped in and said, we demand a lawyer. And then all of us joined in, and we're like, we demand a lawyer. When I told the story years ago, it was like I had no experience with this, so I had no idea that that's what you could do or should say or anything. So they tell us we're leaving. I got up to go, and I said to one of the officers in the hallway, so now there's officers lined in the hallways in our house, CPS in there, and it was just really strange. It's really different. When they told us we had to go, I walked out in the hallway and I said, I want to go down and get her a pair of clothes, because I thought to myself, if we're going right now, it's dinner time, she's going to be hungry, and then what if I need a pair of clothes? I just wanted to be ready. And they were kind enough to let me go down to her room, which was right by Warren's room in the house. And when I went down there, I could see that they were going to be rummaging through going through his room for evidence and whatnot. We couldn't understand why, like, we wanted a search warrant, and they said there was a search warrant for the land, and we questioned them, like, shouldn't you have one for each individual house? How can you just come in and search every piece of, you know, every house on this property? But they just they did it. So I don't remember all what was said to people about it, to the officers about that, but remember that being a question. I went in and got her some clothes, and they weren't right up my back, so I remember having some pictures of Warren and I that he had always told us all through the years that we had to keep that stuff kind of hidden from the law, because it was evidence. So I remember trying to hide a drive that had some pictures of him and I, and then hiding some other pictures real quick, and I was able to do that before we left. So we go out to these buses. I just had her in my arms and her clothes, and first we go in the buses, and we went to the El Dorado Civic Center, and we got there, and it was just this big room, a big metal building, and there was some tables that you could kind of sit at, and we're all like, okay, what happens next? And they brought in some food. It was like different hot dogs and something else. We hadn't eaten hot dogs for years. And it was just really different. And I'm trying to keep this little one safe and just right with me. I was kind of scared knowing that I wasn't her mother, her biological mother. Somehow, somewhere, her mother I talked to her on the phone, and she said, whatever you do, don't let them take her from you. And I said, they just want the older girls. And she's like, Amy, they want all the children. And at that point, I just broke down in tears and cried, just wondering why this was happening to us. And of course, we had in our thoughts the 1953 raid when that had happened. And the thing we had been taught about that was the women didn't speak against their husband. So I was in the mindset, we can't say anything against him. You know, we have to just be silent about everything. Because that was the way we were going to be delivered, because that's had kind of happened in the past.
Right.
That's the way I was processing everything that was happening. So we were in there for, I can't remember how many days, but we just tried to make the best of it. They brought out these big cots, well, a whole bunch of cots for people to sleep on. So sleeping arrangements worked great. The bathroom situation was terrible. We had to ask for a tub to give your child a bath after it had been so many days. I hadn't had a shower for 3 days. I didn't have any new clothes because all the older people went without any clothes or anything. We were then moved to Fort Concho. That was in San Angelo. Was there for however many days. We were constantly told by them that they were trying to keep families together and that their purpose was to reunite. But really what they kept preparing for was to remove the children from their mothers and get rid of the mothers.
Really?
Yeah. So, but they just had to do it carefully here and there. It was it was over 400 children being removed from there. I remember hearing in one documentary, one of the attorneys or CPS ladies said the state of Texas was not prepared for this big of a custody case and to take care of this many people.
Yeah.
So
it was
a mess.
Yeah. For any of our viewers, we can leave links above to our interview. We have one with a CPS worker who went in, and then one with the attorney for the mothers. And both those interviews were, man, the CPS worker, she said it was so heartbreaking. Like, they had no clue. They were so in the dark. They had no idea what they were walking into. She was told originally it was going to be like 10 to 12 kids. And when they brought 400, she said watching like the kids being taken away and stuff was so hard. She lasted a week and she like quit. Like, she was like, I can't do this, and left. And she said it was heartbreaking, and no, they weren't prepared. And every person that we've talked to that's been like in the law system on that side says it was handled horribly. And a lot of it was because they weren't prepared. They didn't know what they were getting into when they started it. And so they were just constantly chasing their tails and doing things horribly wrong.
Yeah. I didn't try to get into what there was lots of people that were keeping journals, that were trying to take pictures to intimidate the people. But I just stuck with my little one that I was taking care of. We did get like interviewed once. By the time I got there, then they were so used to the ladies just saying their name and the name of their child, but that's all they would say. And then they'd say, I won't say anymore without a lawyer. That by the time I got there, they didn't question me too bad. It was just kind of like, oh, here's another one. That's all she's going to say. So it was very interesting to try to, get sufficient food and be clean in that situation. We were finally able to have a shower, and somehow we were able to get we all had these scatter bags ready on the land that he had us have ready for a long time. And we just asked the ladies that hadn't come, that didn't have children and stayed home, would you send those to us? So somehow those got sent in to us.
Oh, good.
And so I was able to get cleaned up and have a shower after a few days.
Were you able to stay with little one?
I was so then the next step from Fort Concho was we got told one day that we were going to the Coliseum. And we got on the bus, and I got this little whiff or whim a hearing from listening to the people talking that they were going to remove caretakers. And I was like, I just got the biggest knot in my stomach. And we had already been trying to keep her mother's children or little ones, other siblings with her. And I was actually blood related to him. I had one conversation with a lawyer in the bus one evening with some other ladies, and I just kind of asked a little more serious and let out more than I probably would have. But I said, what am I supposed to do if I'm not the biological mother? They said, well, I would advise you to not say that you are. Do not say that you are, but if you're related, that would help. So we tried to do that within Warren's family, like be with one of the ladies. I mean, if the children didn't have their biological mother there, and there was only 3 mothers that had children a part of that in Warren's family that weren't on the land.
Okay.
So those children, we just tried to keep them together, and then each of them had a relative that they could kind of claim.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what our plan was. But we get in this on the bus and we go to the Coliseum, and I start hearing that they're going to take away the caretakers. And I turned to the other 2 ladies of little one's siblings, her 2 brothers, and I said, they're taking the caretakers away. And she's like, no, they're not. You know, I was like, they're taking us caretakers away. And I got really scared because her mother's words kept ringing in my ears. Whatever you do, don't let them take her from you.
Right.
And so I talked to a certain person on the bus, both 2 of us ladies did, and said, is there any way that we can stay with these guys? Their biological mother isn't here. Some of the mothers got off in the Coliseum, but it was mostly ladies that were underage that had children, that were under the age of 18. I think there was some other mothers that somehow were able to get in there in that Coliseum. But for me personally, this is where, because she didn't have her biological mother, I guess they chose to bring her over to a different spot. And when I stepped off the bus there, we stepped into the room and they told us, we're keeping families together. You'll be able to stay with your child if you come in here. And I stepped in there, and that's where they tore us apart. But they told us that just leave your children right here for a minute and you can come back to them, is what they told us. So I had little one. A CPS worker tried to get me to give her to another CPS worker, and she did not. She started bawling and she put her head into my shoulder. And I was frustrated, I was scared, I was nervous, I was all the things all in one, just a wreck. And then I was upset that they were making me do this to her. And I finally said, can I give her to this person? And it was one of the older children, not even in our family, but she looked familiar. She had a dress on. She had, was a familiar looking person. And they told me yes, and so I handed her to this girl, and then they told me to step in this other room. And she went behind. They had some cots that were leaned up like this, kind of making a blockade, and the children that were being removed from their mothers went behind those cots. I went into another room, and I walked in, and there was this wall of Texas Rangers with their hands on their hips, with their cowboy hats and their guns on their side. And I'll never forget. That was really scary. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I didn't know why they had guns. You were all this stuff went through your head. And I just wanted to get back to little one. I didn't want to let her mother down. Well, I get pulled off to the side by one of the Texas Rangers and a CPS worker. And they said, you look like you're under 18, so we're going to have to bring you back over here. And in my nervousness and everything, I didn't quite comprehend what was happening. But this had already happened to me once before in Fort Concho when we were trying to get lawyers. They tried to tell me I wasn't, that I was under 18. But I had my license, and so I proved my identity. I was 24 or 25 at the time. And so I thought, here it's happening again. And I said, well, I have my license. And they said, where is it? And I said, wherever you put all our luggage, because it was in the bus. They'd put it under the bus. So he took me to this pile of luggage, and I walked around it, and I found my purse that it was in. And there I saw one of the other ladies that was in our family that was younger, that had gone behind the cots. And she had little one's brother and was taking him to the bathroom. And I said to her, please make sure she gets with this other mother that she had a lot to do with through the day. she was another one of the young mothers that had a baby, and they knew each other, so make sure they're together. At least help her be with somebody she knows. And I said, they're taking the mothers away. And now I think about it, and I thought, if I had not proved my identity, they probably would have put me back behind there, back with her. Possibly I could have been separated again, but I could have stayed with her. But the pressure I was under was very great. And so I went back in there, proved my identity, and they told us we had the choice to go to the ranch, back to the ranch, or to the battered women's shelter. And they were telling some of the mothers that if you went to the battered women's shelter, then you would get your children back faster. So I chose to go to the ranch. I got on the bus with the ladies that were going, and I don't know how they decided. I can't remember how they decided. Like, it seemed like this certain area where I had gone with little one, it's like it was older children mostly, but because we had tried to keep her with her siblings, her two brothers, then she was a younger one in the midst of these older children. And that was the case with a couple of them. So I went back to the ranch, and then I had to face her mother. All three of us that were taking care of her children, because by this time, you know, she had got news of what was going on and came immediately back to Texas. But she couldn't, they had tried, they had come down to the areas and tried to get in, but they wouldn't let any more mothers in with their children if you weren't taken from off the land. So I walked up the stairs, and here comes me, that was the caretaker of her daughter. Here comes the other two ladies that were the caretakers of her sons. And I just remember looking in her eyes and throwing my arms around her and saying, I tried, I'm so sorry. And she was very, very sweet. She just held me and said, it's okay. And then it was like, I don't know, there was this heavy weight on my shoulders for so long. We came home and there's no children on the land, and it's just so different. So many people going through that same feelings as they came home without their children. So then for me, my experience was just trying to stay busy at the ranch. Then they tried really hard to fix up the mess and get things straight so that mothers could come start visiting the children. I was never able to go see little one. Her mother wanted me to be careful because she didn't want me to get mixed up in being her real mother and cause it so she couldn't see her, which was very understandable to me. So I kind of just had to sit off to the side, but it was hard because obviously by now I had this bond with this little one. This was all through the month of April. I can't even remember. I want to say it was a couple months before the case was dismissed and the children were released. And I just remember and I don't even remember all the legal, how that all worked out. Some of the mothers did go to court. Little one's father in the prison did was served papers for little one, her actual hearing. And they had my name on it as the mother. And in a phone call, he called and said, they have the wrong mother on here. You know, he was like, I got papers for so-and-so, but they have the wrong mother on here. But I don't know if they would have allowed him to go to a trial, but he never showed up or anything. But so the children were released and came home, and that was the most glorious, happy day of our lives. To have the children come back to us.
So how long were you without the children?
I was trying to remember that here. I want to say at the most 3 months.
And that's what Ammon said was like 90 days or something.
That must have been a lifetime, though.
Yes. And they took the children and scattered them all through the state of Texas, all in different areas. And so here's another big expense that the priesthood people donated money for, was we had been living there on the land by the sweat of everybody else's brow. They'd been working so hard for us. And then this was a big expense. All the mothers had to get cars. They had to get places to live to try to prove that they were good mothers, that they could handle their children and that they would be in a safe place. So they put forth this effort to do all this with each lady. And people from the creek donated the vehicles that all came down for us to use. It was a marvelous experience of unity and love for each other, how the people in the creek responded to that. Yeah. And we'll be forever grateful for what they did for us. That's how we lived for a little while after they were released, just so that nothing else would happen. We didn't want anything else to happen. But then slowly, here and there, as Warren's children got released, then he quickly swooped them off to hiding. They would go and leave Texas, and they weren't in Texas anymore. And I stayed there with his first wife. Her case with her children dragged out the longest. And her sister Barbara's children, I think she had legal custody of them now, so she was fighting for both of those children to get back to her. And that one took the longest. But finally, that was completely non-suited, is what we called it. We had some visits at the house there from the CPS workers. But as soon as they were released from the state and they didn't have to come get checked on or anything, and everything was good, then he had us leave the state.
Where did you go after that? Like when you left the state, did most people go back to Short Creek? Did people go to other states?
No, for us in hiding was usually in Colorado, in the mountains.
Okay. At the same place as before, or?
We didn't go back to R1.
Oh, okay.
No, it was just, and here's another big expense. Then there was houses that we paid rent for, and we weren't working. So somebody had to be working, making all this money to pay for all of this.
We've heard of the stories of secretly sending tithing money, as they would call it, or a lot of the men that were working in Short Creek were sending a lot of money to these places of hiding, it sounds like.
Yeah. So that's where we went, and there it was. Hiding was another experience. I mean, all of us, I think, by that time had experienced a little bit of being sent to hiding here and there. But now it was the children back in hiding, and you had to get really creative to know what to do to keep them busy, not let them wander on the mountains too far or whatever. At first, when we were in hiding at that time, we would get days where we would get to go for like a picnic and go for a hike and get some exercise and do stuff like that. And at one point, the bishop, that had been the bishop there on the land, let his family gather to one of the houses. But then Warren got upset about that and corrected him and all of us, and told us that, we were supposed to be in our separate houses. When you were in hiding, you weren't supposed to know what happened in the other houses. You weren't supposed to talk to other people. You you were in this little house, and you only knew what was going on there, and had to do your best to do school, to keep the children busy, so.
Was there ever a point, like at this point, Warren's been in prison for a few years at this point, right? And you'd gone through the test of him saying he wasn't a prophet, and, passing that test, okay, he really is a prophet. Was there ever a point through this hiding where you thought, if he's not, like, if the Lord hasn't delivered him at this point, is he going to be delivered at all? Or was it you had to keep hope?
For me,
fear?
and I think I felt like this because of the things that would get said to us, it turned more so that if we weren't, it was because we weren't exerting the faith. And that's why he wasn't being delivered. And years down the road, I do remember at one point he said, if my family was united enough and there was enough faith just among my family, I would be delivered. So then the weight was heavier, I remember, on just me taking that so personal and being like, I'm holding the whole people back because his family is, because we're not prepared. And if we were, he would be delivered.